Next up, we have Annie Finch. I'm trying to pin you, Annie.
Hello. Here comes my bio. So, hi everybody. This is really fun to be back at this festival. I think I was here once before and had a lot of fun. And good to see some friends and acquaintances and people I haven't met yet, but would love to. I've been thinking a lot about these issues, and actually my husband does solar energy activist, so I think a lot about climate change stuff. And I also think a lot about permaculture, which I find extremely resonant as metaphor. And so I want to talk today about my thoughts on the permaculture of poetry. And permaculture might not seem directly related to climate change, but in fact it really is. And permaculture has been really proposed as a very strong way of mitigating climate change. Permaculture, as many of you probably know, I'm no expert or anything, but I just metaphorically, I'm very interested in it. It works with natural systems. It plants together in kind of groupings that aren't necessarily separated by different plants together. Like say you have a permaculture garden, it would kind of blend plants that help each other out, like tall plants with plants that need the shade, and kind of cluster them. And eventually you can even create something that feels very much like a natural ecosystem, but it's actually a garden, so it's self-sustaining. It's really, really cool. And so what I've been thinking about for this presentation is some of the basic principles of permaculture and how the poetics that I practice and that I teach and that I do everything I can to spread far and wide are perhaps akin in some ways to the principles of permaculture. So for my sort of idea of the principles of permaculture, I went to some writings by Matthew Stevens, who's a well-known popularizer of permaculture. And his basic principles he talks about, I'll just go through them one by one and talk about them briefly in terms of poetics, and then I'll close with a couple of poems. So permaculture is my handwriting. Perennial, yes. Perennial, it works with the idea of plants that are perennial and in sustainable systems. So it's perennial and sustainable. And as some of you may know, the poetics that I practice involve pattern, repetition, the structures of repetition of all kinds. But particularly I am most passionate and excited about meter itself, because to me meter is the most juicy and granular and sensuous and malleable and exact and just flexible and explosive and eloquent version of patterning available in language. I mean, it's so eloquent that it's below the surface of language or word or meaning, and it's just palpable, and it even, to me, works like energy waves. So I'm just really psyched about meter. And to me, meter it's perennial and sustainable in the sense that and all poetic form, I feel, is this way as well, that you can look at it on the larger scale as being perennial and sustainable because forms actually grow into other forms. They get passed on from poet to poet. When one person plays around with something like or invents something, the ghazal or the paradal or the sestina or whatever, what's his name, that one? Harry Matthews did all that great stuff with the sestina, So, and this is also interests me a lot because nobody can ever figure out if I'm a formalist and like what that means, or am I experimental? And like, I think in the intersection between experimental poetics and and traditional poetics, there is this exciting edge that I love to inhabit. And to me, form and pattern are all about that. It's about a kind of a reification of form, at the same time a listening to form and an inhabit, so it's just right on that edge between subject and object, and inside and outside, and self and other, that I just love to inhabit, the physical and the spiritual. It's like right there between all those things. So I think, that it's the obvious way that it's perennial and sustainable. Sometimes I think of forms like heirloom seeds or heirloom apples or something that, that you can reclaim old ones that have been lost. I'm especially interested in what I call metrical diversity, which is bringing people back beyond iambic pentameter. I've been actually kind of dismayed, and I can say that here. Hopefully people will know what I'm talking about. As someone who's very excited about the variety of meters, I've been surprised and dismayed, but maybe not too surprised, by the way even the most experimental poets are metrically extremely conservative. People can be all out there with their theory and with their ideas about language and signification and things like that, and self and the author, the I, the lyric I, whatever. They can be all over the place about this stuff. When it comes to meter, they go back to iambic pentameter. I mean, it is just really, really kind of sad to me, because there are a lot of other meters out there, and that iambic pentameter, that was Ezra Pound, his first heave was to break iambic pentameter. It wasn't to break meter in general. He wanted to break iambic pentameter, which had a stranglehold on poetic meter. And now people have gone full circle through this century of total freedom and liberation, and right back to iambic pentameter again. Whether consciously or even just unconsciously, it pops up, and you can see that iambic pentameter still has a stranglehold on experimental poetics, as well as, of course, mainstream poetics and free verse poetics. So I'm very interested in educating people about all the metrical options out there, so at least these options become conscious. So anyway, a little bit of a roundabout, but it brings us to the next idea, which is going to be diversity of forms. But just to finish a little bit more about sustainable, I feel that meter is sustainable not only in the sense of that forms are handed on from poet to poet, and in that sense it conserves the kind of energy, and things aren't leaked through the cracks generation to generation, but there's a kind of a nice efficiency to it, which doesn't necessarily have to be a retrograde thing. I mean, there's experimentation and growth constantly, but also I find them sustainable in a much more exciting way, to me, a sort of a metaphysical way, that meter sustains itself energetically, because when I do really deep scansion of great poems, I discover that meter itself, like on the foot level, and the variations within it, the way they interact with the expressive, the signification of the words themselves, it creates a kind of it seems to me a feedback loop of energy, where the metrical variation itself can create a meaning that shows up in the meaning of the word, and then the meaning of the word reinforces the variation within the meter itself, and this creates a kind of energy that leads, I think, in many cases, in my own experience writing, but also in the experience of reading and scansion, it leads to more energy that then rolls over into the next foot, and just creates kind of this perpetual kind of little engine, almost like I imagine it might happen inside a solar cell, though I don't really know how those work much. But there's something going on that's very, very nifty. That's very, I don't know. It's efficient and yet surprising within that. The micro level of meter itself. So in that way, I find it sustainable and perennial in a really cool way, not the obvious way you think of, with forms getting carried on through history. So there's that. Then there's the diverse and cooperative aspect of permaculture, where it's much more about diversities of plants, all kinds of different variations of familiar plants, but also other plants. And of course, this is one thing I love so much about form, is that it is really multiplicitous. There's so many options, whether you're inventing your own or working with other ones, or variations on other ones. I mean, there's a ton of options, and to me, it's just really fun to read a book that has very clear different forms in it. Like they're different plants popping up, as opposed to, free verse, in terms of, the repeating aspects, it's kind of limited. So it's a little more like a monoculture. You've got the line breaks, and then you can do a lot of cool stuff within that. You've got the open field, maybe, you've got the long lines, the short lines, but, it's not like all the different intersections of pattern and variety that you can have when you're playing around with, with so many different things, or, all about this, you're all poets, but, refrain and repetition and the sound and the look and the interlockings and the patterns and all the different stuff, the hidden stuff, the obvious stuff. So it's just, there's so much diversity and cooperation, I find, also between like the foot level, the line level, the stanza level, the refrain level, there's all these different levels of a formal poem that cooperate with each other and create this really cool synergy. So another aspect of permaculture is that it recycles energy and nutrients, which I guess kind of comes back to some of the things I've already been saying, but clearly things can be recycled not only from poet to poet, but also within the poem. I do feel that you can have the same words. Actually, this is another way really where you can have the same exact word be recycled, say in a really brilliant villanelle, even something like that. The same word can appear in different contexts and mean a completely different thing, which makes a really fun experience, sort of a recycling experience of the words that you see repeating. So there's that. Then permaculture makes use of the edges. I love this. I just love this because, of course, with form, it's all about edges. And I even mentioned my own simple words for scansion terminology because I've just been teaching it forever and in so many in different contexts. So I've come up with, there's not that really many great words for like the accent mark, the unaccented mark. You can say short and long, but that's really based on Greek and Latin, or you can say, I don't know, some brave or some pompous thing, or you can say something unwieldy like unaccented mark, whatever. But so I've invented these phrases. I use wand and cup based on the tarot because I'm a witch. So I've got wands and cups, then I've got ghost cups, which are the ones that have parentheses around them because they're either there and they shouldn't be, or they shouldn't be and they are there. So those are fun. And then for the foot boundary, which is a word I absolutely despise, I use the word edge. It took me like 20 years of teaching to finally find the right noun for this. Very simple, concrete nouns, but easy to play with. So edge is what I use for foot boundaries. So when I saw this principle of permaculture, they make use of the edges, I was really excited because, that is exactly maybe my favorite thing about using form in poetry is the edges, whether it's edges between foot and foot, and just what happens between them, the way the same syllable can be stressed in one context, unstressed in another, and it all depends on what is in the foot with it. So, the edge is all, or whether it's the edges between lines, the edges, between stanzas, or even the edges between poems in a sequence, or the edges between akin poems by different poets in the same form. I mean, there's just so many different edges to play with. And I am a bird name as well, so birds often like edge habitat, so I do love edge habitat. And then finally, Matthew Stevens' final principle of permaculture is that it looks for solutions within the problems themselves. I love that. And again, working with a form, I always feel that I'm finding the solution out of the problem. When I'm stuck, I don't know if the poem is finished. I'll just keep going with it, and then I'll come up with, something will arise out of the problem, like just by manipulating it. As I'm sure you all do so often, because we're poets. I don't know, maybe not every poet likes to, but I think a lot of poets like to kind of puzzle solve or whatever. Like there's a satisfaction in making things go and into patterns. And I think that process is one of finding solutions within the problems themselves, like just rearranging the problem and looking at it until the solution emerges that's a larger pattern. So I love that, and that is one of the reasons I love to work with form, just because when a poem doesn't feel finished to me, I just can keep on playing with the problem itself, rather than trying to bring new things in, but just looking at the problem until it kind of emerges into something. So in these ways, I find that that working with meter and form is an exercise in permacultural principles for me. And I also feel that working in meter and form can be, I'm in Portugal, but it's cold. That working in meter and form can be helpful, I think, in another way for climate change, that I really do feel that it brings other elements into poetry to compete with the power of the mind in current poetics. I think the mind has become so preeminent in most poetry nowadays. And for me, form is so sensual, so palpably sensual, that it brings the body in. It is so palpably emotionally moving that it brings the heart in. It is so, I don't know, it's so inspiring that it brings the will in, and it is so humbling that it brings the spirit in. So to me, bringing in poetic form into, and I've seen it over and over in my classes, I'll teach form to poets who have never had the opportunity to learn it before, because so few of us do nowadays. And they will often find it really life-changing. And I feel it's for these reasons, that it gives permission to bring the body, the heart, the will, and the spirit into one's poetry in equal proportion with the mind. And I have whole systems I've developed where I have like a meter that goes with each of those things: mind, body, heart, will, spirit. I mean, it's just, I do all this holistic stuff with it. I've done it with people who have zero poetic background, but we work with the rhythms as a healing, self-transformative tool and self-transformational tool. And it is, just amazing stuff. So I feel that in this way, it's healing to us as humans, and it helps remind us of our connections with the earth and with each other, and our the cycles of our bodies, and how they connect to the cycles of the earth and the seasons, and all of these rhythms I just find connect us more into ourselves as animals, as responsible members of the ecosystem that we're in. So these are all the reasons that I like to think of the permaculture of poetry. I'll close with 3 poems. They're not that long. They're all very carefully wrought, and they took me a long time to write, most of them. One of them took, I think I started with the last one I'll read. I started in 1985, and it's had so many different forms over the years. It used to be an iambic pentameter, then it was a pantune. Now it's an anapestic, is it still a pantune? Yeah, I guess it is. Anyway, so here they are. And I'll say, my next book, I've just finished my next book of poems. It took a long, long time. I had it finished basically in like 2011, and then I realized that based on the theories I was developing about metrical diversity and the importance of experimenting, exploring different meters, that I really needed to divide this book into 5 different sections and have each section be entirely in a different meter. So I did that, and it took me another 9 years of work, well, it took me until now, so I guess that's even longer, 10 years. And now I've just finished it. And I'm going to read the kind of the structuring poem that's in 5 parts. And each part is only 2, it's a 10-line poem. And each part, it's a 10-line poem, and it's really 5 separate poems. Each one is 2 lines long, and each one is the opening to one of the 5 sections of the book. So you're really getting the overview of the full cycle of the book. And I'm gonna cry. I haven't done this before, and I just finished the book. And you'll find each of these is in a different meter. There are 5 meters in the book. So the first one is for the East. They're invocations. It creates a sacred circle, basically, as in being a witch. So each one invokes a different direction in the sacred circle. So the first one is iambic, and it invokes the east, which is the direction of the mind. But I just yesterday, I had this incredible Ayurvedic massage, and I listened to this chakra meditation after which the massage therapist put on, and I realized that I'm not going to start with the mind anymore in the east. I'm actually going to start in the south with the will. So I'm going to read them to you in a new order. Okay, so this is the first one will be anapestic, and that's about the will. The second is going to be iambic. That will be an invocation to the east, to the direction of the mind. The third will be trochaic. That's an invocation to the direction of the north, the body. Then the west will be dactylic. That's to the heart in the west. And then finally, we'll have the center. In amphibrax is the meter I use for the center, and this is invocation to the spirit, the direction of the spirit. Spell to cast a circle. Speak aloud once or thrice for each one as you face its direction. Invocation to the south. Move my life, live my spark, spark my fire, fire my will my dance, dance desire. To the east. Find wings, find wind, move free, move air, muse, make, weave spell, sing us aware. To the north. Seed of strength now root and ground us, rich earth, gratitude surround us. West, heart of the waves rocking flow in us, love sweet as water come grow in us. Center, come spiral of joy the beginner, below and above center spinner. The circle is cast, we are between worlds, and what happens between worlds changes all the worlds. I'll just stop right there. Thank you.
That was really something. I feel changed. So thank you. That was beautiful, Annie.